Good evening, welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Liz Scott and Stu Newberry here, and it's our pleasure tonight to welcome really good friends of ours, Anke Herrmann and Michael Brown. Anke, you're in Spain?
I am indeed. Yep,
you're in
south
Spain.
of Spain.
Yeah, fantastic. And Michael, you're fairly close to us in South Devon.
Yeah, a bit of a German and Spanish flavor tonight, because I'm half German as well, and I grew up in Spain,
and
so
you speak Spanish, so
there you go.
Okay. Well, if it hadn't have been for us, you could have done this in Spanish.
We could have done it. Yeah,
we could have.
So this evening's webinar is a follow-on from the short talks event that we had in Ivybridge on the 3rd of November. And is one of a series of webinars, which is just a continuation of that conference where the speakers are able to continue the conversation with participants of the event and other people who've signed in. So this evening's event is one where we're going to be exploring the idea of mental health and young people, mental health in young people. And so, Michael, Anke, first of all, before we actually get going with some questions and conversations with other participants, it'd be just really great to hear a bit about your background and what brings you here tonight. So perhaps, Anke, if we could start with you.
Yeah. Well, I don't know where to start. What brought me here? Yeah, I was one of the speakers at the event on the 3rd of November, and I was talking about entrepreneurship from the inside out, and that comes down to the journey I've been on ever since I quit my corporate job and moved to Spain to start a sewing business, and really went off the beaten track, and so yeah, totally threw myself into the unknown and had a few lessons to learn the hard way, apparently. And yeah, I so often thought, how life would have been different if what I've learned in that process, and if I'd come across the inside out understanding of life, if I'd come across that earlier in life, how things would have been different if I'd known that, when it came the time to think about what to study and what to do with my life. And yeah, so I think it's really our responsibility to help the young people that are coming and growing up in a I think more complex time than we did. I think it's really our responsibility to help them along the way, with what we've learned, so that they don't have to go through the same struggles we have. And so that's what brings me here.
Yeah, thank you, Anke. What about you then, Michael?
Well, I've sort of had a lifelong interest in young people, children and young people anyway. My very first job was working with children in care, and then working with young homeless, and then running youth leadership programs, and of course then having my own family of 4 children and now a grandchild. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. So they've been in my life in one form or another in very potent ways. And I think in many ways, when I look back over my life, I recognize that my interest in young people and my working with young people has been partly a playing out of my own growing up, which took a long time, it seems. I kind of didn't really grow up into adulthood at the sort of time of 18 to 20 and that sort of period. It took me many more years to do that. And I suppose I started to see that, more recently, I started to see that I so looked to the world around me and my circumstances to define who I was and how I was at any given moment. And I looked out there to try and find a sense of myself. And it was a pretty desperate journey, really, and it's taken me in all sorts of directions, and very positive directions in many ways. But it's been a pretty desperate journey too. and a misguided one, and an innocently misguided one. And until recently, I started to see that that's not where my sense of self and my sense of well-being really resides. And what I see increasingly is young people who are growing in a world that is increasingly overstimulating. The stimulus, what there is out there for young people to contend with, isn't getting any easier. In fact, I would say it's getting harder. And the feeling of pressure is, I think, becoming greater, and with all the consequences of that. So I'm really interested in, and I have young, boys of sort of 18 to 24 now. So I'm particularly interested in this area, simply because seeing them grow into young men in their own right, and seeing some of the struggles and some of the mental health issues, if you like, that they've kind of encountered along the way in their own sweet ways. But it's been a real revelation. So that's kind of why I'm here, and why this subject is very, very dear to my heart, really.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. And I think, one of the things that we wanted to bring to this webinar this evening is that mental health in young people is very much in the news. It's very much something that, if you look at the statistics, is actually quite alarming to read the statistics of just generally young people going through our education systems being referred to the mental health services. And I think one of the things that we're going to be talking about tonight, and it'd be really great as well if you can assume that some people don't fully understand the inside out and 3 principles understanding, which is very much what we're grounding this talk in. So it'd be good to sort of explain that. But looking in the context of young people, mental health, and how this understanding could really support them on their journey. So that's something we're going to keep coming back to. And for those people that are participating on the webinar, if you'd like to contribute or ask a question, if you go to the chat box, you can type in a question. If it's quite short, we can ask the presenters, Anke and Michael, or alternatively, just put in a comment saying that you would like to have a chat with Anke and Michael, and we'll then unmute you, and you can ask your question or have a conversation with them directly. But we see this as very interactive. So at any point, if you want to ask a question, please do. So the question I'd like to put to Anke and Michael, and it would be great if you both answer this and then maybe take this conversation forward, is, so what is this understanding that we're talking about, the inside out 3 principles understanding? And how come do you think that would be useful for our youngsters to understand that? So who would like to take that first, Michael or Anke?
Okay. I think the thing that's really hit home for me, I'll speak from my personal experience. I lived my life really feeling the victim of my circumstances. Life was out there affecting me, and I would either have some control of it, a little at the time, but most of the time it felt like it wasn't really under my control. So that feeling of being a victim. But now I understand something very different. That I wasn't feeling my circumstances. I was feeling my thinking about my circumstances. So I'm now seeing the power and the nature of thought in how it creates my moment by moment reality. And it's that shift, that everything, that I am the creator of my experience moment by moment by thought. And so, sometimes I look at my circumstances, right, let's keep it in that kind of realm of young people and children, whatever. I can look at my children, and some days I have such love for them, and I feel the joy of them. And other days I can look at them and go, really? Okay. They don't kind of, I'd rather not be with them, for whatever reason. And I'm thinking, well, why is that the case? Why have they suddenly changed overnight in a way that makes them seem like ogres or very lovable? Or is there something going on in me, in some thinking on my part about them that's creating my experience? And of course that is the case. And when I can see that in that moment, then whatever's going on out there, I'm much more able to be true to it and respect it for what it is, rather than what I think I'm bringing to it. It's not about me anymore. It's less about me as a consequence. So recognizing that I'm living in the feeling of my thinking every moment, even when it doesn't look like that. And very often it doesn't look like that. Very often it looks like, oh my God, they really are pissing me off, excuse my French. It looks like that. They're really causing me to feel something. But that's never the case. It's never the case. Even if after the event I can see that, at least I have the capacity to acknowledge that's what's been going on. I don't act. I'm less likely to be reactive to them, less likely to be disrespectful to them as a consequence. So that's been the key shift for me. The power and the nature of thought. And one of the other things that I've really more fully understood is how easy we can be seduced by the feelings of our thinking. So all thinking will will give us an experience. Consciousness will give us the experience of whatever we're thinking. So we'll always have a real feeling for whatever is happening, whatever we're thinking. And because it feels real, and it is real in terms of the feeling state, then it kind of seduces us into thinking that whatever we're thinking is actually true. So we have to be very mindful of that. We're simply just feeling the experience of our thinking. That's what's going on. And in essence, we're kind of making it up most of the time anyway, if not all the time. So that's kind of my take on it. And I think in terms of, how to reflect that with young people, they look around them at their circumstances. They look at the school they're in, the exams they have to take, the boyfriends, the girlfriends, their parents, the looking ahead to whether they go to university, they're going to get a job, whether they're going to be secure enough, whether they're going to have a home they can call their own. Now, these are the kind of things that are going through the minds of young people, And the more the mind fills up with these thoughts, it seems, the more they'll experience the sense of that inner pressure. And the problem lies then when there's a confusion between how it makes them feel and how that leads them to believing that what they're feeling is actually true, that it's to do with the out there, with all these things they're thinking about. And therefore, it becomes like a huge pressure. It becomes an internalized pressure. I experienced that when I was younger. I had, my life seemingly was not working for me, and I was seeking ways of creating that sense of well-being. I looked for ways of creating that sense of well-being without realizing that it was already inbuilt. So I saw, my journey was initially drugs, and that gave me at times a feeling of well-being momentarily. So I thought, well, actually, this is working for a little bit, so I'll just keep doing it because it seemed to do the trick for a little bit. But in the end, ultimately, I wasn't realizing that I was creating a whole bunch of thinking that was creating this feeling of anxiety, this feeling of pressure, and that I would relieve it through the use of drugs. Young people are using all manner of strategies to quieten their minds. To quieten the minds, because it just feels like a really busy place up there for a lot of young people. That's my sense of it. It gets crowded. And ultimately, I think we're all looking for that sense of well-being, that sense of peace of mind. I know that's where I've been journeying all my life, really. So yeah, kind of in a nutshell, I think if we understand that we're really feeling our thinking, and that feeling and that thoughts by their very nature move on. In their own sweet time, they move on, particularly when we don't get attached to them. We don't feed them with more and more thinking. It simply moves on. And as thoughts move on, of course, then our feelings change. So we don't have to be afraid of that. They come and they go. And that's the nature of the beast, if you like. That's the nature of our experience. And not to be afraid when those feelings, and I think that's another thing, is that we get very afraid of what we call negative feelings, difficult negative feelings. And we get more and more caught up in them. And we give them a label: mental illness, depression, whatever it might be. And it seems like that's something outside of ourselves rather than something that we're creating from thought in the moment. So I've spoken quite a lot, Anke. I'm just, maybe you might want to say something.
Thank you, Michael. I love what you were saying there. And one of the things that stands out for me is this idea that young people are using many strategies to try to quieten the mind. And there's a complete irony there that the harder we work to change things using things outside of us, the louder the noise and the more crowded it becomes. So, Anke, I just wonder what you heard there for yourself that prompts you to tell us a bit more about your interest in how this inside-out understanding could be really of great use to young people.
Yeah, I mean, I love the way Michael gave the overview. I think it really hit the spot. I think it really explained it really well. What came up for me is when Michael said how everybody's sort of dealing with it in a different way, is when I think back, when I was like a teenager, for me it wasn't even the studying and what to do as a career, that was kind of, I turned into a rebel on that front a lot later. I think what really would have helped is to know that my well-being doesn't come from somebody else. The amount of shitty relationships I could have saved myself, had I known that I don't need a boyfriend to be worth something. That's really something I thought, God, if I had known that earlier, and I think, and I can't tell whether we had it easy at the time or whether that's harder now, but it really strikes me how everything young people are exposed to is suggesting an outside in. It's, even all the love songs is the way you make me feel. It's everywhere. It's pretty much everything that comes, everything they hear, every movie, everything they get taught. So it's really not surprising, and I think, at 18 or something, I wouldn't have questioned everything I'm taught from like everywhere. So I think it's really not surprising that they're struggling. And, and some sort of rebel or some try and sort of quieten the mind, and others really resign. There's this, I see that a lot where I live, there's this sense of hopelessness. Why even bother? Why even bother to anything? Because there's nothing out there for me anyway. And it comes back to that, I'm a victim of circumstance. So I was unlucky enough to be born into economic crisis. So that determines my life. And if we can help them even open the possibility that may not be true, that you can thrive no matter what the circumstances are around you. I think that would make a huge difference. And the relationship thing, that comes back all the time. Like for me, like it's come back a couple of times now, because there are statistics, and I don't know whether that's particular in Spain or whether that's elsewhere as well, that like domestic violence is like really heavy here, but it's what really threw me back was that I think it was like 3 out of 4 teenage girls have the boyfriend controlling their mobile phone and, you know, and doing, you know, starting abusive behavior, like when they're teenagers. And you think, if these boyfriends just knew that the way they feel has nothing to do with who she's talking to on the phone. So actually it's not, I think the initial sort of direction was like that whole thing about, you know, what to study and what to do professionally. But I don't know, as Michael was talking, it sort of, no, it's this whole, it's relationships as well. You think like how many marriages that you know are doomed to fail right from the start. A lot in that direction as well.
Yeah. So that's I think there's a few things I'm hearing in what you're saying. And when we talk about the inside out understanding, or the 3 principles, one of the things that we're pointing people back to, and potentially we're pointing young people back to, is that extraordinary space of, I call it resilience or okayness or resourcefulness. It's like at the core of who we are. And I'd love, in a world that is very much, there are a lot of professionals in the world who are supporting young people who don't see that. They see resilience as something that a child needs to build, or confidence or self-esteem as something that is accessed outside of them by doing stuff. And I'd really love just to make that distinction on this call as to what we mean by resilience, and maybe what other health professionals mean by resilience. And Michael, are you happy to start just responding to that one, please?
Well, I think the first thing to say is kind of resilience is inbuilt. It's just something that, you know, if we took a, you know, like a fast moving view of our lives, and we just marked out various points in our lives and recognized that we've done things along the way that demonstrate our resilient quality. You know, it's there, it's present. We maybe don't always see it. Even in the hardest of times, even the times when we have felt at our worst and at our lowest, we've come through it. We don't stay there. We don't stay in that place where it just simply completely submerged by that experience. We come through it generally, even if it takes time. But that's resilience in action, if you like. It's kind of inbuilt into the system. And I'm imagining a time when children grow up with this understanding. Children not only just grow up with it, understanding it, but actually see it in their lives. They see it happening. They see it in others, because it's pointed out to them that this is what is available to us. It's inbuilt in all of us. So we start to see that resilience, that we come through something. Rather than get caught up in the problem of it all, we see that actually we come through, and we come through in a solution. And when children can grow up knowing that, and they have innate well-being, they can see they return to their sense of well-being over and over again. I'm imagining that as you grow into adolescence, into that extraordinary time of adolescence, where I don't know about you, but in adolescence, I just felt it all, every single extreme of feeling. It's a really potent time, and it's a really creative time. extraordinarily creative time, because you're finding your way in the world as a young man or as a young woman. And if you really understand that you are the creator of your experience, moment by moment, that your circumstances cannot make you feel anything, that whatever you're experiencing, be it negative or positive, is simply you creating that. It's you coming from your thinking in the moment. Then this, I feel that the source of creativity can really explode, and young people can be the potent force that they really are. At the moment, I'm not seeing that. And the tendency is to focus on what terrible problems young people have. Now, I don't want to deny that, because that's the truth. And I think there's a lot going on. But when we point people to help them to look at examples and times of their life when they have come through something, when they have shown their resilience, that this is something that naturally happens. As their thinking changes, as their thinking quietens down, something starts to come through, a new possibility starts to come through. That this is the pattern. This is what happens. This is the system, how it works. That there's nothing special about it, or it's just simply how it is. And when we can see that, alongside the fact that our circumstances don't have the power to actually make us feel anything, then I think we are then we can really be in our real creative force. I love working with young people for that very reason. There's such energy, such extraordinary energy, that I got frightened by it. I got terrified by my anger and my fierceness that would come up for me. No one told me that it was okay to have these feelings. Nobody told me that I would have these feelings and I would, they would move on and something else would take its place as my thinking changed. I never saw that that was a creative force, creative energy coming through me. And unfortunately, I think we demonize young people. And this is my particular perspective. I think we demonize young people and we're afraid of that energy that they bring. It's a fiery, powerful, creative energy. And we get frightened of it. I know from my experience that fiery, angry energy is one that I'm probably most fearful of in myself. And I've noticed that in a lot of other people too. And yet it's a very creative, it's if that fire is directed in a positive way, it's a very powerful force, very creative force. But just coming back to the resilience bit, this is, I would simply point young people to the fact that to notice in their lives when they've come through something, in spite of all the kind of circumstances and difficulties, they've come through something. They've shown something other than what they believe is true about themselves. Something else has come through. So, and that's very powerful, I think.
Great.
That's great, Michael. We're going to ask for people to ask questions in a moment, but I'd love to just ask the same question of Anke. So it'd be great if you've got some questions that you'd like to, or contributions that you'd like to make, just use the chat box to do that. And Anke, if I could just ask you the same thing. We're talking about resilience. What is it? We live in a culture where resilience is perceived to be something we build or is outside of us, or that we need to somehow get. But we in the Principles Inside Out understanding, we're talking about something different. How might you describe that?
The way I understand is that well-being, in the sense of ease and flow and creativity, that's where we come from. That's the baseline. And when we think that we are at the mercy of our circumstances, or other people, then we start getting worried, how are we going to control all of that? How am I going to manage all of that? And then our normal creativity can't come through. But as soon as we can see that nobody can make me feel anything, or even if I don't do anything and my mind quiets down, then I'll come back to that base of well-being. So it's not something that, and that's a space where all of a sudden I can see, oh, I could do this. And a new idea comes in, and some new thought that maybe the issue we just saw dissolves altogether, or we can find a solution. And we can always come back to that. So that's not something that we have to learn or need the 3-step process to get to. It's always there. And I think that's why it's so powerful to understand that we're not at the mercy of circumstances or other people, because that takes so much of our minds. If you're not busy all day trying to control, how can I say something that so-and-so doesn't get upset, and, try and control how somebody else feels so that, then they can, and you kind of get yourself into spin. If that falls away, then you're okay. And new ideas come, it's when you're in that state of flow, like new ideas come in left, right, and center. And something that looked like a big problem in 1 minute, all of a sudden, what was the big deal about that? And I think that's something that would be, if young people could just grow up knowing that, and not to be afraid of, because if you know that, okay, what I'm feeling is just a reflection of thought in the moment, then you can just let go. And then it's like a wave, it's like a roller coaster, goes up and down. And something that I've noticed that I never, like when I was young, like anger was just like, that's just not, like you don't do anger, because you could piss people off, and who knows what consequences that had. So anger was never something that I would allow myself to feel. And it's something where I'm now like, actually sometimes, I can actually quite enjoy that, so, because I can allow myself to go there. And I've just recently learned that that's really freeing as well, because you can just live it and you can just allow it, and it's not going to hang on there forever. It's going to pass through. So I don't have to kind of tense up and try and now do something to not feel angry. No, I can feel angry, and if I allow myself to go there, it passes through so quickly. But then there's no resentment left over either. Then it's just out of the system. It just passes through. And it allows for us so much more intense experience in both directions. It reminds me of a conversation Jamie had with someone, and the guy was saying he was on antidepressants, or he'd just come off. And so he was like, sometimes kind of, I'm going to have these real dives. And one thing that really struck me was, he said, the weirdest thing is, when you're on antidepressants, you don't feel anything. So you try and get over that depression, because what you want to feel is the ups, the highs. But now, actually, that also means that you feel the lows as well. But we're designed to feel everything. We're not just designed to kind of be all happy all the time. It's, there's a whole range of emotions, and to know that we can allow ourselves to feel it all and know we'll be okay no matter what.
Thank you, Anke. And
can I just add to that?
Yeah, sure, Michael.
Thank you, Anke. I mean, I think what comes to mind for me is, particularly when we talk around this subject, is always young children. Yeah. I think we come into the world, and no child believes that they're not good enough. No child believes that they're not going to be able to do. They feel they can create whatever they choose.
Just watch them play.
Just watch them play, and we see them fall and hurt themselves, and they bounce back. We see them, be very upset and demonstrate their resilience. They come through it. And they don't question. There's no questioning going on in their mind. It's simply that's how it is. And it's sometimes it's painful, sometimes it's joyful, and it moves through all of that. And children simply live that. I don't want to set us aside and say that we're not that person, because we are. We're exactly that. All that we've done is learned a whole bunch of thinking along the way that says we shouldn't, we can't. This is how it is. This is what I think I am, who I think I am. This is how the world looks and works. And they're just stories, and we make it up along the way, and we act according to the stories that we make up. And no wonder it feels like we're not in control of this kind of the story, as it were, because they're not our stories. We've made it up. But the truth of our story is something that happens just in the moment, when we're free to simply express ourselves in the moment, without being caught up in ideas about who and how it should, how it should all be. And children absolutely demonstrate that. I think that you could have a seminar, a webinar with a whole bunch of kids, young kids, seriously, and we just watch them at play and do their stuff, and we'll just see it in action. And that's really the learning place, and they've always been the greatest teachers in that respect. But we are those kids.
Oh yeah, we are. Definitely.
That's not what is. We've just simply obscured our natural capacity, our natural sense of well-being and resilience. We've obscured it with a whole bunch of thinking that we've kind of believe in. That's the other thing, we kind of get caught up or over-believe in the illusion of thought, that what we're thinking is real and true.
Yeah. And as soon as you know that it's an illusion, you can still get caught up, but it's just not the same anymore.
But the fact that we do get caught up, I mean, it's like watching the girls here. When they play at horses, they are horses. There's no question in their minds that they're anything else other than a horse or a dog. And that's all that's happening, is they're just imagining, creating some thinking about horses and dogs, and they become those animals. And then the next minute they're having their supper and they're thinking about something else. And so it's beautiful to watch. It's just that when we have thoughts that are what we might call negative and difficult thoughts, and we have a feeling that feels really uncomfortable, and we go, oh, I shouldn't have this feeling, or we get frightened by it, that's when we start to add more and more thinking around it, and it just takes us into the spiral downwards of that. But it's still just thought in the moment that's bringing that on, whether I'm a horse or I'm depressed.
Great. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Anke. Wouldn't it be great to see if any of our lovely guests would like to contribute, just maybe take into account what you've been hearing so far, or maybe your own experiences that would be really useful to hear. So is there anybody that would like to say something? I'm looking towards, I see Lucy waving at us there. So
there we go.
Okay, so.
Have you just muted her? That's fine.
Yeah, okay, Lucy.
Hi. So I'm really new. Thank you so much, Michael and Anke.
Anke.
I'm really new to all of this, to the three principles. I was introduced by a friend of mine, actually, who I think's on at the moment, Andrea, and I've been really struggling throughout my life, sort of going in and out of. I've sort of been attaching myself to sort of traumatic past events, and I just haven't been able to move through them and leave them behind me. And yet I would see so many people being able to do that, and I was at a complete loss as to why I wasn't able to move forward and leave the past in the past. And so then when I was introduced to the 3 principles, I was quite resistant to begin with, because I'm a counsellor, and so I'm training to be a psychotherapist as well, transpersonal psychotherapist in London, and so it's all about, you know, Freud and analysis and all of that, and so I was very resistant. I was like, oh, I don't want to, you know, what is this? It was challenging every bone in my body, and I went away, and for a couple of months I was just like, but I didn't feel the same. My system felt totally, I felt like there was a sort of an opening within me. It was almost like a sort of grain of truth that just trickled down inside of me, and I didn't feel the same. And I've just been on this pathway for about the last 3 or 4 months of reading, listening, but also just sort of understanding more and more how we create, how thought creates illusion, and it is so fascinating. I can't even really sort of describe it. I'm at that stage where I'm a bit confused, a bit kind of can't really, you know that one.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm at that one.
But me too.
To never be the same again. And I want to tell everyone, but as soon as I start talking, I go, oh gosh, no, just no. And I go from the sort of personal to the impersonal, you know, I've sort of, you know, I'm dipping in and out of everything all the time. But so that's a little bit of background, because I'm passionate about mental health around teenagers, around children, absolutely passionate in getting involved. And today I'm a teacher as well. I'm a primary school teacher, and I've done quite a lot of work with secondary school teenagers as well, and so that's a bit of my background. And I guess today there was a really sort of I had a real moment with my sister, and she's got 4 gorgeous children, and I went to go and watch their school plays, and they were adorable. And my sister's really worried, but doesn't say it really so much, about her oldest child. I'm actually quite worried about her oldest child. I know she's okay, because I know that we're all okay, but my sister sort of said, well, you know, I don't know how to point her towards that. So I guess with all that long-windedness that I've just been through, and I guess that is my question to any of you, really, to some suggestions as to how to, what I could sort of suggest to my sister, and then she speak to her.
That's great, Lucy. Thank you so much for that. And we're going to ask Anke and Michael to speak to that, which I think is a really, you know, what you've highlighted is such an important piece for people that care for youngsters, parents, which is you see that a youngster is okay, and also you're holding that you're concerned about that youngster. And how do you point to that resilience? How might you do that? It's like a how-to question. I get it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Great. Okay, so Michael or Anke, how might you respond to that? Who would like to go first? I'd like you both to respond, if possible.
Yeah, actually, what comes up for me was Dr. Amy Johnson. She does her Ask Amy things, and she had one video on exactly that topic. But I don't know exactly that, but I'll find it for you, because what she really pointed out is that everybody can see what they're ready to see in the moment. Like, you can't kind of take somebody and say, okay, now let me sit you down and let me, you know, shove the 3 principles down your throat, or like, you know, I think it can't ever, because it's not something like a mathematical equation that you can explain on a logical level. It's, and somebody will have an insight when they have an insight. So you can, so I think, yeah, the first thing that Amy pointed out was that, okay, you know, you want to respect that whatever somebody is doing, they're doing what makes sense to them, given the way they understand the world in the moment. And nobody likes to be told what to do. So I think it's so tempting to kind of go in there and say, well, actually, you know, you should be doing, you know, but I think that's not likely to work. And I think if it comes down to like living in a moment and link that particular thing. Actually, do you remember when last year we were there? And, you know, when there's something that kind of in that particular moment where you can point them to, you know, like you're really angry now, but it's funny, last week when your friend came over and said the same thing, you weren't. What do you make of that?
Yes.
You know, and I think out of those kind of situations, you know, the teenager, whoever it is, can actually get to a point where they think, oh, actually, funny, I sort of thought of that. And that's when something can sink in. So I think there's a lot less to do, really. And I think they also pick up a lot simply from the way we are being in the world without actually having to sort of say anything. So I would actually think that there's a lot less to do. Although I mean, I know it's like, I think everybody, I don't think I've ever spoken to anybody who's come across the 3 principle who hasn't gone, oh, this is powerful. I need to kind of tell everybody, and I will need to explain it to everybody. So I think there's this impulse is probably always there, you know, because you think you know something that's so powerful and you can see how it can help the other person. But unless they have an insight and unless they can see something different, they're not going to see anything.
Thank you.
Before I come back to you, Lucy, I can give you an example just about what Anke has been talking about there. And it was actually at our conference, and there was a friend that I sing with. He was concerned about his two young daughters, teenage daughters. They're both at university. And he sat down beside me one evening and was telling me about how worried he is about them. And I just said to him, look, why don't you come along to our conference and just see what you make of it? And he didn't really know, he knows very little about the principles, but he was willing to just come along and experience the various presentations. And I saw him afterwards, I spoke to him afterwards, and just the question was, what did you make of it? What did you make of it? He's called Jim. What did you make of it, Jim? And he said, I was just blown away. He said, my wife and I, we spoke about nothing else all weekend in relation to our lives and our daughters. So I was just curious. His wife wasn't there. And I said, so what seems to have opened up for you then? He said, well, what's opened up for me, he said, is I realized there's nothing wrong with my daughters. He said, I just need to get out of the way. He said, they're amazing. They're amazing young women, and I just need to get out of the way. Now, that's a great insight for him. And, you know, it might not be as maybe as quick for other people, but that was the experience that I had and he had, and it was lovely to hear. So what about you, Lucy? What do you make of what you've heard so far?
Yeah, really interesting. Maybe sort of the less is more approach, for example. And sort of just, I guess, coming from sort of not leading by example by any means, but just sort of like being the person who you want to be, like sort of just, I guess, I guess just being very natural with my, very natural. So it's not the change, but sort of if she sees that I'm okay, then maybe she'll realize that she is also okay as well.
And I love just what you've said there. And earlier when you said that you just know that that daughter is deeply okay, and just what I see seeing you in this brief conversation is this, you know, wonderful, caring sister and auntie that is just there for them, and you know, you bring that rich experience to the party too. So,
but I think the 3 principles has had a very big, profound effect on the relationship that I have with my family, which was very fractured, and literally it moves me to tears that how you know how powerful the 3 principles, what it's done for me in such a short amount of time. So
it's so lovely to hear.
That's great, Lucy, and I'd love to turn to you, Michael, if there's something you'd like to add to that.
Yeah, Lucy, I mean, I think what Anke said was very, very wise. But I think it's really significant that when you describe the situation with your niece, that you didn't actually speak about the problem. Because that says to me something very, very strong, which is whatever is going on for your niece, it doesn't need fixing.
No.
She doesn't need fixing. You know, she's moving through whatever thinking is going on for her in the moment. And then what does that then say about the responsibility of your sister or you in this case? What, you know, what do we parents or loved ones around the child, what's our responsibility to that? First, primarily to recognize that the children don't need fixing. As Anke said, you know, they're doing the very best they can according to the way they see things in the moment. That's just, and yes, they're in the throes of that, whatever tormented stuff they might be going through in that moment. But when they come through it, there's an opportunity to invite them to see how perhaps previously they might have dealt with it differently. Have you noticed at times, you know, you've seen it differently at a different times. So what does that tell you? But I think one of the things that because of the work I do with parents, one of the things that really also is important to recognize here is that I, as a parent, when I see my child going through a difficult experience, it's inevitable that I will have some feelings about it. You know, I might be very upset, or I might be angry, or frustrated, or anxious, a whole bunch of feelings coming. If I can see that these feelings are not coming from the child, that she is not responsible for making me feel this, if I can really see that, then I'm not going to be reactive. I'm not going to want to change the out there, because it doesn't make sense to change the out there for me to feel any different. It's not logical.
Yeah.
So I will be my tendency would be to be much more respectful, to be out there. And my responsibility would be primarily to maintain a good feeling.
Yeah.
You know, our children respond best when there's lightheartedness, there's a feeling of security, there's a feeling of love. When I am in a loving place, even though I might be feeling stuff, and I know that's where that's coming from, if I remain in a loving place, then that's the environment in which your niece or any child can see themselves almost. It's like they see themselves. They got the opportunity to gain some insight into what's happening for them, because that's the only place it can come from. I might be full of good advice to my child, but actually it's of no use really, unless it's really seen by them from within. So yeah, not to get caught up in the problem.
That's great.
Yeah.
Thank you. So thanks.
Actually reminds me of, just quickly throw in that really reminds me of how Michael finished his talk. And I can't remember the wording exactly, but it was just, love them some more.
I think to see them see that our children, when they go into what we might call bad behavior or difficult behavior, it's an expression of insecurity. It's nothing more. There's some insecure thinking, some unhelpful thinking going on. If we can see it that's all it is, and not get caught up in the story, the content of it, that it's an expression of insecure thinking and unhelpful thinking, what else would you want to do as with someone who you love? Except love them some more. If they're feeling insecure, change it, do something different, make them stop. I mean, it doesn't make sense to do any of that. Love them more because after all, you, me, everybody else on this screen, I suspect, has had some insecure thoughts somewhere along the line.
Michael and Anke, thank you so much for this evening. We're moving towards the last 2 minutes. And I do just want to say that next year, 2018, in Devon, we're looking to run a conference around mental health in young people. So we'll keep you posted on that on Facebook if you're interested to learn more. Because for us, it's something that's so important. And a minute each, if both of you wouldn't mind, just if there's a little nugget that you could just leave us with. I'm going to turn to you first, Anke, a little nugget, and then to Michael, and then we're going to wrap up for the evening. So Anke, is there a nugget of wisdom you can leave us with?
What comes to mind is to help. Our responsibility is to help our kids and young people to never forget their unlimited potential and creativity. And that all the rest is just thought passing through.
Thank you.
Awesome, thank you. And Michael, if I could
put myself out on the line here. There is no such thing as mental illness. There's just some unhelpful thinking. Simple as that. I mean, it may feel and look like that. It may feel like, but actually, even people who are what we might call severely depressed, this is the system's way of saying or doing the very best we can to actually find our way back. It's like finding our way back, and our system is always doing that. We're always wanting to return to a place of well-being. So even if it looks really awful, can you blame young people, or anybody? It doesn't have to be young people, but let's say young people who are suffused with all this thinking about the world and how potentially scary it is and how much pressure there is in it and all that, to want to just, with all that thinking going on, for the body just to want to go to shut down. It's too much for the system to take.
Yeah.
So it seems like a wise thing to do, just to go quiet and a little bit depressed. That's the label we give it, but actually maybe it's deep rest they're really getting.
Great.
Anyway, that's my parting shot.
That's great. Both a big thank you to Michael and Anke. And Anke, how might people get hold of you if they want to find out a bit about you? And then Michael, I'm going to ask you the same question. If they want to get hold of you, how can people do that? So Anke, if I could start with you first.
Yeah, that's pretty easy. My website, ankeherrmann.com, and all other links to social media, whatever, it's all there. So that'd be the easiest.
Thank you, Anke. And Michael?
I've got a very out-of-date website called Devon Life Coach, and at some point I'm going to get it together so it reflects my new way of working and understanding. But that is a point of contact: devonlifecoach.co.uk.
Great.
Thank you.
And if you'd like to see the videos from the conference where both Anke and Michael were speaking. They're both 15 minutes each, really great videos. And you can catch up with those on the Coaching Connect website. So just go to coachingconnect.co.uk. And that's the place to go to if you'd like to contact myself or Stu. And we're also very active on Facebook and social media.